Good evening and welcome to Beyond the Numbers, where we break down the biggest economic stories and their impact on Ghana. I'm Winston Taki and I'm doing this with
Akufo-Addo, and in fact, we turn our attention or focus to developing stories around, the U.S. sweeping tariff that Donald Trump has actually announced. The baseline number is 10%. But we know that there are countries that actually suffered more than that baseline figure. The key question we are asking tonight is, Donald Trump's sweeping tariffs, is Ghana really hurt? And that's what we'll be analyzing on Beyond the Numbers today. We'll go to the smart world now. And Winston, what just started as a campaign promise in 2024 is now a reality. We have to analyze this and ask the question, is Ghana really going to get hit from this kind of, tariff imposition that we are seeing currently?
the world is behaving as if Trump did not tell them what he was about to do, based on just how swift he went ahead to implement this policy. During the campaign, he made mention that his key focus is to protect U.S.-based manufacturing companies and interests of U.S. companies, and this has been his key promise during the campaign. So they supported him. Now that he's in power, he made sure that indeed that particular policy or promise is fulfilled. During the election campaign season, we saw the trade conversation between the Democrats and the Republicans, and that's what you see here were some of the key trade activities or policies they promised. Immigration, banning of LGBTQ, a trade grant and aid. This was what we saw during the Dutch, that he launched the Dutch, just as we have for oral here in Ghana. Climate funding. So all these are some of the things he's been working on. Immigration, he started already getting a lot of support in the U.S., and that has given him some kind of boost as a president. However, some were also not too sure with this new tariff that he's imposing, especially its impact on the U.S. citizens.
Now, you have to stay with us because we have all the numbers and all the gist for you to understand. This kind of tariff imposition, will it really even affect Ghana? What is the trade vulnerability of the country at the moment? Now, we go back to what Winston told us about. These were the top 5 campaign promises or top 5 things that caught the attention of the ordinary American when these two were on the ballot in December of 2024. In terms of the economic angle, trade was number 3. Then there was another part called grants and aid. We already saw that 90-day pause on U.S. aid, and we're already feeling the impact where this year, for instance, we requested for almost $150 million in terms of U.S. aid. We understand there's a 90-day pause on that. We definitely are not going to get that money now. And then we are being hit with a double whammy, which is now tariff. And to borrow Trump's words, you tariff me, I tariff you back. And this is a reciprocal tariff. He said that depending on the kind of tariff you put on me, I'm going to reciprocate this. And we understand in Ghana's case, for instance, we impose a 15% tariff on goods that come from the U.S. And so they decided to put that in the baseline, side. But it's important to analyze it this way, that this is something that Trump really wants. And why is it so? Because he's been looking at the numbers and he has seen that looking at 1990s to the early 2000s, tariff was actually one of the key ways that U.S. was really using to get more domestic revenue. But what we understand is that the U.S. shifted focus from that aspect where they were now taxing the ordinary American. He said, I'm going to cut taxes. If you cut taxes, how are you going to close the loophole? Just like President Mahama has scrapped a number of taxes. He's shown us that, look, there's a certain tax refund account, and that's what we're going to use to close the gap. But Trump said, no, we are not going to focus or depend on a certain tax refund account. We are going to focus on one thing, tariff imposition. And he promised, just like he said, the world is behaving as if Trump didn't warn us that this is what he was going to do. Maybe we already didn't expect it so soon, the magnitude and the spread that the whole world is actually seeing at the moment. Possibly that could be why we are all having a big shock at the moment, Winston.
Trump is someone who likes competition, someone who, if you look at how he's handled his business, Trump Tower, Trump businesses, he's very competitive. And one thing that we all know for Trump is his strategy. He likes to play by strategy. He likes to win. So when you compare the U.S. trade with China, looking at how it's been for quite some time now, Trump feels as if the Chinese has not been favorable to the U.S. companies.
Yeah, he feels they're taking advantage of them, right?
Exactly. For instance, the automobile industries, there's been a lot of import of a lot of Chinese cars into the U.S. market, affecting the automobile industries in China, in the U.S. actually. So it's easy to get access to the Chinese cars than the U.S.-made cars. And he said this is affecting that operation in the country. However, if you look at the U.S. manufacturing sector itself, most of the parts that they use in manufacturing are imported from China and Japan, which have also received their portion of tariff.
They are part of the two worst offenders.
Exactly.
The worst offenders list.
U.S. is playing a game. Trump is playing a game where he feels if you want us to do business, come to the table, let's negotiate. So he wants everybody to come to the table, basically.
There's a plan.
Exactly. But if you look at the narrative of all those affected, they are saying Trump is rather going against the World Trade Organization policy that gives access to fair trading policy. And that is something they are arguing about. But Trump, at this point, says, I will use my tariff as a strategy to bring you to the table, whether you like it or not, but it will depend on the competitive advantage that each country has. Ghana, Africa, we don't have much in terms of what we can put to the table, but in terms of resource, they are still unrefined, no much less value addition, except South Africa, which is part of the BRICS nations, basically being hit by over 100% tariff based on Trump's strategy to collapse that BRICS.
Interesting submission there, Winston. But, I mean, the key word you used was, when we started the show, that reciprocal tariff.
Yes.
You tariff me, I tariff you back. And we understand that some of the big countries are now, the G7 countries are now at the negotiation table right now, not with Trump, but with themselves, trying to say that, look, what is the plan? This is a chess game. Trump has made his first move. What is our first move? Definitely, it looks like he wants our queen or our king. What do we also want? They say that they are going to retaliate. We've seen Canada, Mexico. But the question is, do we, Ghana, do we even have the muscle to, sort of like retaliate? Today, I saw that the Foreign Affairs Minister, Akufo-Addo, has actually invited the ambassador to Ghana, U.S. ambassador to Ghana, Virginia Palmer, to answer questions. But the man to really answer those questions is the man here. He says that this is my strategy. This is how I want to move on going forward. And we were talking about how widespread is this whole tariff thing. And you made mention of South Africa.
Yes.
Now, what you see on the big wall is the magnitude of the tariffs we are seeing. The deeper the red, the higher the tariff. And you can see that even in the West African region, it is only Ivory Coast that has very high tariff. Why? Because if you go inside, you see that Ivory Coast has a very high tariff on goods that comes from the U.S. Definitely because it's a Francophone country, they deal more with France and others, not really with U.S., so they don't really have that kind of relationship. But if you come to Ghana and its neighbors, sort of like Nigeria and other, Anglophone countries, you see we are all around the baseline figure of 10%, Nigeria is around 14%. It means that Ghana as a country has been able to find itself into the good books of, America. Listening to the ambassador who said that Ghana still remains that strategic partner to the U.S. And even looking at the fact that we were not added to the worst offenders list, although we are placing a 17% tariff on goods coming from the U.S., they were very benevolent and say, chop 10%. You for chop 10%. But we are not taking it lightly because we know the magnitude that this can actually pose to us, because we are talking about dollars, right? Winston, we're talking about dollars. It means that can affect our, exports, revenue and all of that. But I really want us to talk about the spread. The spread is really around this side of Asia, where you have India, you have China, you have Japan, and coal, Russia and all of that. I mean, Europe, you go to the northern part of Europe, also there. But even in EU, what has happened is that if you take the average tariff placed on European countries, it's around 24%. But UK enjoys 10%. Many have said that, well, it looks like the strategy was to take UK out of the European Union so that, I mean, when America wants to deal with Europe, they can deal with them without touching the UK. And it looks like that's what we are seeing at the moment, where America has actually gone ahead to tell them that if you really want to do your NATO things, go ahead and protect Ukraine by yourself. But tonight, the key question is on Ghana, that country that had the bold step to first of all had 17% tariff on goods coming from the US.
Yes.
Of course, we were enjoying the benefits from AGUA and all of that, and we didn't have a president who would come in and impose 10% tariff. But I want us to take us through the vulnerability test that we've been doing in terms of trade. What is the value? How much are we even looking at, and why should we even be worried at the moment, Winston?
You know, you showed us a graph earlier that the map that tells us about the risks related.
Yeah.
You saw currently China is being hit by about 54% tariff totally, because initially the conversation began with 20%, with a new one introduced that is 34%, making it 54%
cumulatively,
because they appeared to be strong contenders in global trade. If you look at Trump, he wants to still make sure the dollar remains stronger and against many global currencies, as against the BRICS, who are deciding to bring about their own currency, but it's still conversation. So the whole strategy is to break down BRICS, because now each member will have to go to the US based on their own terms instead of a cumulative as a group or as a bloc, which will not work. Now, if you look at Ghana, where we stand now is going to be quite dicey. We may not be hit much, although it will affect us marginally, depending on the kind of products that are needed or have given us a boost in terms of global trade. Total trade volume in 2024 stood at 2.48 billion Ghana cedis. Already, we have been exporting a lot of unrefined products outside the country, and that has become kind of giving us a boost in our revenue going forward. Throughout the last 7 years, we've seen revenue boost due to our export, gold export, mineral export, and these are something that we can talk about. But if you look at vegetables and some key commodities that has been relevant in global trade, we seems to be doing well in that area. But if you look at the trend, especially between us and the US, it appears it only happens when the Republicans are not in power. We have been making a lot of profit during times with the Democrats. And that has been the analysis based on the trend we've been observing for quite some time now. So in 2013, our trade with the US stood at $364.8 million dollars. And if you look at 2016, it appears that same trajectory keeps still happening in 2016 and 2013, which reduced marginally between those years. But in 2017, we saw trade increasing to about $750.4 million US dollars, and that has consistently been stable since Trump was then the president in 2017, and that he also introduced the same tariff during those times. But when he lost, subsequent years, we've seen trade boost. That is between Obama's time, Biden's
period.
Biden's period from $717 million to $2 billion.
Roughly $2.8 billion.
Exactly.
That's actually the highest we've had in a decade, right? And just like you put it, that happened under a Republican, a Democrat, rule. I mean, to test the hypothesis that we have, that usually when the Republicans are in power, in terms of trade relationship with Ghana and Africa, is not really that high. Possibly because they don't see us as, a big economic, agent or something like that. So their relationship with us, just look at this one as well. I mean, look at the imports from the US. This is imports from the US. Ghana's import from the US has been staying consistent. I mean, the average has always been around, let's say, roughly $900 million. But in terms of export to the US, you see it's always dropping and always being, going through that cyclical movement.
The export is the red one.
The red one is in the blue one. Yes. Exactly. 2016 to 2020, you painted that picture there that when you have Republicans in power, what happens is that our exports to the US, which brings in revenue, exports revenue, and allows us to even get access to dollars, isn't really that high when you have Republicans in power. But when you have the Democrats in power, then you spoke about that outlier called $2.8 billion trade that we recorded. And although it dropped all right, but it dropped to $1 billion, 1.2 billion, rose again to 1.6 billion. It means that maybe if we had the Republicans the Democrats in power, maybe we wouldn't be talking about tariffs, and Ghana wouldn't be caring about scratching its head about 10% tariff. But the key question is, in terms of trade vulnerability, does America really matter? Because this is data from the Ghana Statistical Service, and we're trying to gauge the country's trade vulnerability outlook. And we've seen that in terms of Ghana's top 5 export countries, the countries that we export things from, or we export things to, okay? Looking at the top 5, US isn't even part of the top 5. We should be, scratching our heads if it had been, let's say, Switzerland, United Arab Emirates, South Africa, China, or India, in terms of our export to these countries. They are hovering around. Switzerland, for instance, export stands around 59 point, almost 60 billion Ghana cedis.
That's 99% of our total export.
Absolutely. And you see, this is the kind of vulnerability analysis that we have to do to test whether what has happened really matter. I mean, in terms of tangible trade. I know that one thing that is really going to affect us is when the US decide to cut grants or aids or technical support, because that is where majority of our worries is actually is, because in terms of tangible trade, we should be worried if it is this guy, China, or let's say United Arab Emirates, and we're talking about tariff. These are the 2 countries or the 5 countries, although US is part of the top 5, but you compare where US is at the moment, Winston, to China. When we are talking about tariff, possibly you shouldn't really worry, but when we are talking about aid cuts or grants, then the US is a big guy. In terms of technical support, they're a big guy. But any decision US makes definitely affects all the Bretton Woods institutions, especially when it comes to the health system, WHO, and all of that. Interesting analysis here, trying to understand it from the perspective of the data given by the Ghana Statistical Service.
These are various products, as you can see on the screen. The black one indicates mineral resources that are imported from United Arab Emirates, the UK, and all the related activities. So different colors ascertains the kind of minerals being imported. Tells you how much we trade with China. China has consistently been a favorable trade partner for Ghana for several decades, from the establishment of resources. If you look at the kind of road agreement we have, look at the kind of grants and monies that we receive, loan agreement we receive from China.
Sino Hydro and Co.
Exactly. And if you look at the differential interest being charged in the loans compared to Bretton Woods institutions, they are quite wide. China makes sure they have a relatable relationship with Ghana and basically Africa. There are several articles to test that assertion that the scramble of African resources, China had been leading the pace for quite some time now. China decided to do that, their analysis, and realize that Africa is really a destination, it's a heaven for their continent. Because if you look at the kind of resources that we have from our gold, from our minerals, from our trees, from our forest reserves, all of them are great resources to finance their booming industries over there. So we import from them because they have the factories, they have the manufacturing industries, they have the technological industries. The number of phones that are imported from China every week is amazing. A number of technological devices that come to Ghana from China, especially from manufacturing, from furniture, there are a lot. So this tells you that indeed a lot will not happen, especially from that angle. However, whatever happens to China will certainly affect your production in China. So certainly people who import from China will experience some increase in China because China will try to have a fair balance in terms of
that's a good point. Yeah.
From their country. So yes, it will affect Ghana in terms of how much we import, the cost of importation, especially those who deal in huge imports from cars, from mobile phone, from furniture, from bathroom utensils and all that. Surely it will affect their production going forward.
Very interesting then. I mean, let's open the equation and possibly analyze it also from this angle. That US is imposing a 54% tariff on this big guy who is Ghana's #1 import partner, China. What it means is that the amount of dollars that China gets from the US in terms of trading with the US is going to go down. Although it is reciprocal in any way, but if you net it, definitely China will be on the losing side in some sort of sense. What happens is that if China loses the dollars they possibly will get from the US, they may want to find alternatives and they may want to close the gap. Is it also going to lead to China increasing or marginally increasing their tariffs to countries like Ghana or countries in Africa who import a lot from them in order to offset that kind of loss they might get from, the kind of sweeping tariff imposition we've seen from the US? That's another school of thought that says that the more US continues to press on, this might affect China, UAE and other countries, and they may want to find alternatives, and Africa could be that bottom they would want to press in order to close the gap. Another school of thought is that, look, US is going about throwing their weight, imposing tariff, right? What if everybody decides that, well, because you are imposing tariffs, we are not going to really trade with you? It means that is going to reduce the demand for US dollars. And just like any other commodity, the dollar is also a commodity. And just like any other commodity, if the dollar, loses its demand power, what it means is that, its value is going to go down and it's going to perform worse against major trading currencies. And maybe the cedi will take respite from there that, well, on the global space, the dollar isn't really performing well, so we might take some sort of respite. So some are saying that, well, if you analyze on the other side, this might not even be a negative news for Ghana. Pray that maybe this will affect the strength of the dollar on the global scale and you will take shelter from that. Because once people begin to find alternatives and are not trading with the US, the key question is the demand for the dollar will go down. But another question is, what sort of currency would they use in that alternative trade? Is it going to be the euro? Because we know that one currency that the dollar stands tall against the dollar, there are two, right? Is the euro and the pound. So it will be interesting. It's a two-sided coin at the moment where you lose some, you win some. But on a net situation, what will be the position for Ghana at the moment?
Look at the history of China. They are good with negotiations. Not just China. A lot of nations now have realized that bilateral agreement, especially between countries, is a way to go. So there's going to be a lot of signing of bilateral agreement between countries now than ever. Trade policies will now be reviewed now than ever because everyone is now going to look at what is their competitive advantage going forward. Ghana, we have a lot of competitive advantage if we are to reassess where we stand in terms of our resources. Instead, we have to review several contracts that is leading us into several debts. As a country, new government is in power. There is the need to review a lot of the trade policies, a trade contract, and see where we stand, especially the government's focus will determine whether prices of commodities will reduce, inflation will come down. If they come down, will there be enough food in the market for individuals to have? So this are a lot of conversations going on, but we'll build it all from there and assess it to see you as citizens where you stand, especially in terms of revenue, how much it will cost you. Although the Bank of Ghana has made remarks that this will affect us some way, so they are cautious in terms of the policy rate. The IMF also indicated that this is going to be a global risk for trade, and that are all indicators telling you that the world global confidence in doing business is a bit slow due to this announcement. Already the stock market has been affected.
Yeah, it's responded
negatively. And China also gave a reciprocal tariff of 34% against the U.S. And Donald Trump says that was a wrong move. So he's still playing his
come
test.
back?
It's going to come back again. So let's hope by today he'll certainly release his statement.
But I mean, maybe there can be some good news in this whole sweeping tariff, measures where if other countries are able to find alternative and that affects the strength of the dollar on the global scale, maybe the cedi might take respite and may stay stable against the US dollar. And that can be some sort of an advantage to you at home. So if you are wondering what sort of positive byproduct you can actually get from this whole analysis, the truth is that if the world or other parts of the world who are now fighting the US are able to find alternative and maybe decide to go away from using the dollar in trading, maybe developing economies like Ghana might have respite. But currently, what it stands is that Ghana is going to have a double whammy, where we are being hit so hard on the grants and aid side that has been cut, and now we are being, suffering from that 10% tariff imposition.
Donald Trump is going to lead us also. Certainly, let's trumpet ourselves out of this studio. I will see you same time on Wednesday at 2 p.m.
So Wednesday.
Friday, 5:30 p.m. Have a wonderful weekend. Bye-bye.